right, well, let's get started and welcome everyone. This is our last Lunch and Learn for the year. And some of you have been on every single one. So very, very excited today. So today we are going to hear from our gold partners, Redcat Hospitality Technology. So Redcat has been with the FCA for many, many years and supported the franchise community as always, even, to the point of always being attending, obviously doing the webinars as well, giving back some information. So today we're going to hear about a topic of from fragmented to frictionless, unifying your franchise technology for maximum potential. So what that means, Lawrence, who's on the call, he's the Global Sales and Marketing Director and founder of Redcat. He will be explaining this. And, of course, so will Louis, who's Global Head of Marketing and Partnerships. So together they're going to give us some really to sort of demonstrate how they can help you increase revenue, decrease operational costs, that sort of thing. So without further ado, over to you, boys. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think that's my cue. Let me just share this with you guys. It always works better if you get stuff on the screen. Let me know that that's working fine.
Yes.
Perfect. So hey, thanks for having us on and coming and sharing a bit of your time and your lunch with us. I want to talk to you a little bit today about what we call the fractured tech stack, and just a little bit of a precursor. So we deal in hospitality. So hospo is our world and our business that we're in all the time, and so this presentation is really focused on hospitality, but I'll actually make sure that I talk about it a bit in terms of how it applies to your business, regardless of whether it's hospitality or not, and just give you at least some ways of relating to it to make sure that you can apply the thought processes or the concepts into your world. Right. So I'm going to give you just a couple slides on who Redcat is, only because it gives you some context to the conversation. Right. So the first thing is just around who we are, literally. So we've been around for over 30 years, based in Melbourne. We're a software development house. So we have over 100 staff here. We focus on the hospitality sector. So years and years ago, we started doing cafes and restaurants. And then now we tend to do mostly quick service and fast casuals, but still very much in the hospital space. Global footprint. We have offices in Melbourne, in Cremorne actually, and also offices in the UK. And we have operations, if you like, or customers in quite a few about 15 different countries around the world. And that's because of our customer base, which I'll just jump into real quick. So customers, hopefully you guys recognize a couple of these names, but guys like the Grills and the Nando's and and Boost Juice, for example, those are the ones that drag us around the world a fair bit and have helped us to expand and to have that global footprint. So last little thing is, what do we actually do, right? So what we actually do is we'll go into those customers and we basically put in a tech stack into that customer that unifies all the different bits and pieces they need to run their hospitality operation. So if you think about a typical QSR, and when you go and deal with them, it's everything from their operational side, right? So how they take the money at the point of sale, how they run the kitchen, how they run the drive-through around them, things like the aggregators, the Uber Eats of the world, and the DoorDashes. How those things that information, those sales are brought in. Kiosks, all the different components. So we bring all that together into one place. So what you'll see in this slide is, we think that we help them to manage or mend that fractured tech stack. So that's a little bit of context, right? Let's just talk about what the fractured tech stack is. And by the way, if you got any questions, things, if you drop those in, Louis is going to be watching for those, and we'll probably address those at the end. I'll do a little bit of Q&A on it. And again, I expect at least some questions on how does this apply to my business, right? As in whatever you do. So jump ahead. So what is this? Let's define, right? What is this fractured tech stack? So in any business, right, regardless of whether it's hospitality or something else, if you sit and plan out or plot what does the technology look like that you're using, it'll look really pretty. It looks a bit like this, so you actually sit it down, you have a nice diagram that makes a lot of sense. In reality, though, once you implement that and you start using it, it tends to shift a little bit and look a bit more like this, right? So you do end up with a real mess. And just for relational, like to help you guys to relate to this, even though I'm talking about hospitality, if I look at our own business as a software business, right, not as a hospitality provider, but as a software business, we internally have this same problem, right? So we look at the things that we use to run our business and generates and build software and also service it and do help desk and all the bits. We look at all the different components and we go, oh my God, we have a fractured tech stack. Like we have a real problem with this. So we are also battling this same problem as a software business. But this is how we help our customers fix their problem. And then we need to figure out what we do, for us, right? So how does this develop? So how do you get to this place where you've got a fractured tech stack? So in a hospitality business, it works a bit like this. Somebody will open a shop, right? And then they open 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And as they're opening more shops, they start adding more complexity to their business. And that complexity eventually starts to become quite messy, right? And again, I think if you think about whatever business you're in, this is true. It might not be opening more shops, but it might be expanding your business. As you grow, the complexity of the business grows, and the interrelationships between the different components just gets more and more complex to the point where it at some point will become a problem or it'll inhibit growth, right? So in our customers in their hospo tech stacks, right? What does that mean? So in their tech stacks, if you sit and evaluate, okay, what's my problem? They get things like multi-vendor support. So they're dealing with multiple vendors to try and deliver a product to their customer. And that becomes difficult, right? Because those multi-vendors, I mean, it's like herding cats. You're actually dealing with so many different vendors and everybody's going, oh, that's not really us. It's probably the other guys. So a lot of issues with how do I deal with all these different vendors, right? Second one is around data synchronization. So what'll happen is when you have all these systems who hopefully they're integrated and they talk to each other, but the depth of the integration might not be great, right? So you might find a good example I had was I talked to a guy who was using 2 different systems and they were dealing with inventory. One of the systems could only count inventory up to 999 units, and the other one could count into the tens of thousands. So fundamentally, there's going to be a problem. If there's ever more than 1,000 units of that product, those 2 systems wouldn't be able to talk because one of them doesn't understand more than 999, right? So the concept of data synchronization amongst these disparate systems becomes a real problem, right? And it could be how they communicate, as in the technology they use to communicate, or how often they communicate, or the depth of their integration. If you go up into customer journey, so customer journey becomes a problem around this because you're trying to let's call it unify the experience, right? You're trying to give those customers a convenient and consistent journey through your business. But if you're doing that in multiple systems, life gets difficult in terms of keeping that unified. So again, think about in our business with our customers doing hospitality. So if you go to a kiosk and you order in a certain way, but I might use a QR code ordering system. It might be a different system technically in the same shop. So now I'm going to order in another way. But if I walk up to the tills, for example, I might deal with them in another way. And maybe the menu is displayed differently on the digital menu boards, So you start to get this fracture around how the customer deals with you. And that can hurt things like brand engagement and personalization. And it just doesn't feel very, very comfortable for them, right? It's a challenge. And then operationally, right? Operationally, when you're using these different systems, it becomes difficult to run the operation with the variations, if you like. So a good example that I can give you is in a typical restaurant, they'll have their point of sale or their POS system will actually generate, here's the ticketing through the kitchen. So typically in a restaurant, we may or may not know this, but when your order comes in, the order actually gets split up into bits, gets pushed all around the kitchen to the different areas that are going to build that part of the order, right? Whether it's the fry or the grill or whatever it is. And then it gets put all back together at the end. And on that order, as it's split up, they'll have all the modifiers of what you want and don't want. Whether you want extra sauce or you want chips with your burger, whatever it is. So that goes through in a certain way. Now, you might find, for example, and I've seen this, where if an order comes in through Uber Eats or through DoorDash, it actually gets printed on a different type piece of paper and it looks different. So now the kitchen has to deal with something that looks a little different, getting through their whole world and coming out the other end and still getting delivered to the customer, even though it's actually remarkably different. And often that can create problems when that's where you'll get a meal that has the wrong components in it or whatever it is. And then loyalty becomes an issue again in our customer base. It's very difficult to deliver consistent loyalty if the systems don't match, right? How do I make that customer feel like I care about them across those different systems? So a good example of that could be, and we've all seen this, where you get like a gift card, and the gift card works, say at a retailer. The gift card can work at online, but if you go into the shop, they'll say, oh, the gift cards don't work in the shop, they're online. Or vice versa, they work in the shop, but not online, because again, that's just two systems that don't talk to each other. So this whole concept of, how do I deal with this, or what is this fractured tech stack doing to my business, I should say. These are the sorts of implications you'll have. And then if you flip that around and say, well, that's the operator, right? But how about from the consumer's perspective? What are they seeing? Well, first thing is it might be an inconvenient service, right? So they might, for example, prefer, I don't know, a QR code ordering versus using a kiosk. But the journey is so different that it's actually very inconvenient or inconsistent for them. And that goes down into the ordering experience. So one is it might be difficult for them to interact with the business, right? The second one is when they do interact, it's actually quite different across the two different, the multiple different methodologies that you're using. And then going to perceived value. So then if you think about, think about hospitality. If somebody's bundling, let's say they've got, the way they run their business is they bundle their meals and they have lots of meal deals. Well, you might find that in, I don't know, let's say in Uber, you struggle to put the same bundles together, or maybe in your QR code system, or maybe in your kiosks, or maybe, so having these different approaches to the consumer just confuses them. And then they start to misunderstand your value prop, and they could potentially, it just becomes a pricing race to the bottom. I don't really know how to make this work for my consumer, right? And into mono-channel loyalty, which we talked about a little bit. The other challenge from a consumer perspective around loyalty and mono-channel, which I think is a good real life example. So I fly a lot. So I'm in Qantas. I'm a platinum member, right? So what I love is when I go in, somebody kisses my ass and helps me and does whatever we need to do, like to give me a pleasant experience, right? So they do a really good job around this, giving this experience to me. However, if you lose some luggage, you suddenly become nobody because you're like everybody else. Because in their world of loyalty, they haven't really figured out how to push that loyalty experience down across the rest of their business. So you lose a piece of luggage and you feel very normal and nobody cares, and it's very hard to find your luggage, right? So it's an interesting mono-channel experience, right? Where you actually go, oh, I thought you've made me feel special before, but now that you've lost my luggage, the world's pretty normal. Yeah, it's pretty horrible. Up into the top one, disconnecting with the brand. So the result of all of this, right? This kind of mayhem that you've created is you can get customers saying, yeah, I like that company, but they're difficult to deal with, or I don't quite feel as special as I thought, or I'm just feeling there's enough inconsistency that I'm not comfortable with the brand, right? Okay, so that gives you a little bit of like what the problem is, why it's an issue, and some of the challenges it creates. So if I then said, well, yeah, but how do I fix that? So in our world, and I think this is pretty, again, this definitely applies across different businesses. There's three real ways that you can approach this, like three ways that our customers can approach this to try and fix it. And they're middleware, partnerships, and APIs, and a platform approach. So what that means is if you start with middleware, and again, in our industry, middleware is where somebody goes, okay, I'm a restaurant group, right? So, and a good example in Australia is GYG. So I'm GYG. I've decided to take responsibility and control of my world. So they go out and buy a piece of middleware. So there's a bunch of companies that'll do that, like MuleSoft and that sort of thing. So you buy this piece of middleware. You employ anywhere from probably 50 to 150 software engineers. So you build up an entire almost business that just manages that. But you build up some resource, right? Depending, no matter how big it is, you build up some resource. And then you take responsibility. You, as the customer, you become your own force, and you actually take responsibility of choosing who you want to work with in your business, what the components are going to be of your tech stack, and integrating them in, right? So you integrate them yourselves. So GYG says, yep, we will choose our bits, we'll put them into MuleSoft or similar, and we'll manage that and take responsibility. And that is one way that you can solve this tech stack problem, because you start to unify it by just through control, right? You're connecting it in. So that's one. And that can work really well. Has challenges, right? And the challenges in that one are probably more around the cost of doing that and the complexity, because you're taking responsibility yourself. So you got to go, how do I, what am I going to do to make this work? The more common one that we see is partnerships and APIs. And that's where you go to all of the components of your tech stack, right? And you say to them, geez, it'd be great if you guys could work together, And so you do it through, you don't take responsibility, but the challenge in this model is kind of nobody takes responsibility. Honestly, that becomes the problem, because you're actually just asking everybody to work together nicely. And using APIs are literally just the tech name for the methodology of transferring data, right? So basically you're saying, I'm going to use this concept of sharing information using APIs, and partnerships, asking everybody to work together. And where that becomes really challenging now, so again, in our particular industry, it might be you have a company that provides kiosks into your business, and you've got another company that provides loyalty into your business. And you now have to ask the loyalty guy to integrate into your point of sale, but then also integrate into that kiosk. And if you change the kiosk or the loyalty, you have to redo all that integration. So as you change the components, your complexity is quite high, and you're asking a lot of favors in a sense, right? You're saying to these different players, hey, I need you to also work with this guy over here or that guy. And so it is a complex environment, and the concept of herding cats comes up quite often. And it is a challenge because, again, generally nobody's taking responsibility. They're generally all claiming that responsibility is somebody else's, if that makes sense. So a tricky one, but the most common. And it can work really well, but you have to manage that. There's a lot of management to make it happen. Third one is the platform approach, right? So in a platform, and that's a Redcat approach and others, right? That concept is you go to somebody who will take responsibility for the platform. So they'll go and say, yep, we will provide this platform. And it doesn't mean that there's not others involved. You still integrate out to a few others, but they probably are, the platform people, like our Redcat, are probably controlling most of the things in the platform. And the benefit there is that your platform is, sorry, I should go back one. In partnerships, the benefit around the partnerships and APIs, you have lots of choice, right? So you can choose whoever you want to deal with, but the challenge is actually getting them to work together effectively. Right? So if I jump forward to the platform, in the platform approach, you have less choice, right? Because whoever's doing the platform is choosing the partners that they integrate with. I mean, you can ask them nicely to integrate with somebody new, but generally they're integrating with a certain set. So you have less choice, but they should be higher, you'd hope, higher quality choices because they've chosen that company and done a good integration in with them, right? So that the platform can be, like all of these potentials, the platform can be a great option as long as you get a good partner who has chosen well in terms of who they're partnering with for the extra bits that they don't do themselves. And then you are, though, in this platform side, you are really, it's almost a marriage, not a partnership, right? Where you're really getting into bed with this company, and you're working closely with them to make sure that you're in a happy place, because they're controlling your destiny more so than the others, because it's one company, right? And they're taking the responsibility, right? So three ways to do it, right? And three, they're all different. Each one can work, right? It just comes down to how they work, and how they deliver that result you're looking for, right? So middleware partnerships platform. And fundamentally, you're trying to get to this unified tech stack. So go back to those early slides. You want to get rid of this fracturing that's everywhere and get it as unified as possible. And it's never going to be perfect, right? But you are working towards a place where everything talks to each other really nicely and you get a much nicer customer experience. And then the last slide I had on that was actually just talking about the benefits. So basically where you're getting to, it's the opposite of the stuff we talked about, right? So you're getting you want to get to a point where it's single point of contact to fix your problems. The data is synchronized really well. So that means, if you think about that from a good example might be sales data. If you, again, in hospitality, if you are selling things at the point of sale in a kiosk, online ordering, QR code ordering, through Uber, through DoorDash, any other way you can think of, you need to be able to actually understand how many burgers you sold, no matter where they were sold. You need to understand loyalty, no matter where the loyalty happened, who that was. And you know what I mean? You want all that data to be unified too. That's a big part of understanding your business and managing it and growing it. Top one, consistent customer journey, right? So again, you want to get to that point where the customer is actually very comfortable with interacting with your business, no matter how they interact, right? It actually fits. It's a consistent operation. They don't feel, it doesn't feel funny for them almost to pick any particular channel they want to talk to you. Efficient operations. As you start to have this happen, it should mean that your business itself should operate better because you're using fewer systems and more, you're using them better, right? So again, back to us as a software company and the challenges we have. When we did an audit a few years ago, we did an audit on how many systems we used internally, again, to build our products. And there was way too many. Like there was a lot of different systems. So we went through a process of saying, okay, well, we need to reduce the number of systems. We need to get to that more efficient place where everything's synchronized really well, but there are fewer bits and pieces that we're dealing with. And then the last benefit is omni-channel loyalty. So you want to get to that place where a person, whatever you determine loyalty to be, right? Whether it's earning and burning points, or it's gift cards, or it's bronze, silver, gold recognition, or whatever that is, right? You want to feel that, or you want the consumer to feel that, regardless of their entry point into your business or their interaction with your business. I've actually seen in the UK, for example, I kid you not, a very large chain, like with more than 100 sites, on their kiosks, the screen on the kiosk that you walk up to says, if you want to use loyalty, you have to approach the point of sale. So I find it kind of crazy the way some people do this loyalty in a very half-pregnant way, where you're like, it's like loyalty, but not very unified, not very nice. But that's where you want to head to. That's where you're trying to get your world to. And I've hit Q&A. I don't know if I hit Q&A early or late. Louis, jump in.
There's nothing in the chat.
There's nothing in the chat, no.
That's very disappointing. No,
it's very disappointing.
Show it down to everyone. Let's get some questions.
What questions do we have, people?
Should have prepared a couple earlier.
That was quite detailed, that's for sure. There's got to be questions. There's got to be some questions.
Easy. Almost too easy.
I know this
Nobody
is the
putting me on
last
the
one
spot.
of the year.
Can be statements as well if you don't have a question.
Yeah, like I say, it is interesting that and Louis and I have been through this stuff together internally. The whole examining our own business and saying, okay, so what are the challenges? What are the fractures? And in a typical business, it'll be things like your CRM isn't united. You might have a couple of CRMs, dueling CRMs, we usually call it. So you have customer information in a couple of different places or 3 different places. It might be that some of your operational tools, are quite fractured and then don't actually talk to each other, that sort of thing. So the big challenge here, really, regardless of business type, is saying, well, how do I simplify my world, start to unify my systems, and make sure that they are, communicating together, right? And the biggest challenge is, how do I get from where I am to where I want to be? So how do I define as is and to be, they usually call it, and then how do I, map out how do I get there?
Okay, we've got a question in the chat. What API providers do you see used the most?
So the one, just for clarification, right, on what an API is. So most people, because an API is just a very technical name. If you go back to the old days, let's just talk a little bit about what an API is, because it's good to know. If you go back to the old days, like in not that long ago, say 10 or 15 years ago, well, probably 15, 20 years ago, because systems didn't talk to each other. That was like, no, you just, whatever you have, you have. And then about maybe, let's call it 15 years ago-ish, you'd see a lot of systems that would do kind of like what we might think of as an import-export, but you basically would send a text file between the systems, right? So you'd actually fire one, and still happens today. One system will just literally drop a text file to another system. The other system picks it up and reads it and uses it. That's seen now as pretty old fashioned. So we don't support those, because if there's a problem in the text file, you don't know what to do with it. Like a computer doesn't know, it can't ask anybody, and it goes, I don't know what to do. There's an error in the file. Right? So we moved then to these things called APIs. And all an API is a standard for two computers, and we're talking about computers in the cloud, so servers, or let's call it clouds for in our modern world. Don't make me define the cloud, but if you're talking about something up in AWS or something up in Amazon or something up in like a hosted computer somewhere, right? Those computers will talk to each other using APIs, and all that means is one computer will pass, using a set of rules, will pass information to another, and that second computer will actually speak back. So they will verify that the data is correct. They'll have error handling routines between them where they might actually say, oh, I didn't get that. And they'll requery and say, please send it to me again. So it's basically a modern, nice way of having a two-way conversation between any two systems or computers, right? And what that means, we've all of us use this all the time. It could be even when you open an app on your phone to do your banking, right? And it doesn't log in correctly. So, but then it pops up and says, oh, it didn't log in. Can you try again? Simple as that's just a two-way communication between that phone and that cloud system, right? So if you think about all these APIs really are just ways of these systems talking to each other. What you then find is that most of these systems will have their own APIs, so their own like rule sets, and they'll talk to each other. But somebody has to program them to actually understand what each one is saying. So you can either do that direct between two systems, or sometimes people will use a third system that sits in the middle called middleware, right? And the middleware will actually communicate. So I don't really have an answer to the question, to be honest, but it's at least a definition of what we're talking about. There's lots of different pieces of middleware, but it honestly just depends what systems you're trying to connect and how, like what the best way to do that. So that comes down to it. Like seriously, a software architect will usually sit down and go, this is how we're going to make this work. And they'll define it. But that's kind of the tool set they would use.
We've got a couple more questions.
One more question. Yep.
Go for it.
Okay, yep.
Let's get less technical. Yeah, go on.
What redundancies are in place for a catastrophic incident?
Wow. Okay. So I don't know if that's a Redcat question. So let's assume it is for a minute. So what you find nowadays for most systems, right? Because again, it is a challenge when you have this fractured tech stack. You've got data sitting in all sorts of different places, right? And that can be quite concerning in terms of if something goes down, you might lose all of your order data for the last 5 years, or who knows, right? So what we do, for example, when you host things in the cloud, so we use Amazon. So when we host things in the cloud, as long as you're not going to do this yourself, but as long as your provider actually understands what they're doing, they'll do things like they'll snapshot that, and which means that basically take imagine it like a photo of the system, and they'll actually back that up onto like other parts of that cloud. So basically, AWS will take a picture of all your data and store it for you and hold it like a backup just in case. And so in our world, I think those backups are done every few minutes, right? So there's this constant backup happening. So if anything catastrophic happens, we have things to back up from. And those are actually usually backed up to another part of the world, believe it or not. So they'll be, because we're in Australia, those might be backed up into, say, Singapore or someplace different to again, make sure that everything is very secure and copied elsewhere. And then there's just a process. If there's a problem, there's a process of reinstating that, bringing it back on board. And then again, depending how your systems are designed. So in our world, at a shop if there's a catastrophic event. So one of the POS systems, I don't know, catches on fire. One of the other systems would actually have the data in it that is backed up, and it'll actually take over so that you can keep serving customers till you run out of terminals. And the same thing with the internet. If the internet goes down, you want a system, our system will fall back and actually work locally. So again, if you try and apply that to whatever your business is, right? Just think about, well, what happens when the internet dies? What happens if, like if you're still in a world where your core data of your business is sitting on a computer in your office, or being backed up into a computer in a closet somewhere, you need to think about what that means if there is a catastrophe, like the building burns down. Does that mean you lose all of the records of your business for the last 10 years? Because that's a problem. So you need to figure out a strategy that helps you get away from that or overcome that.
Do you have time for any more questions?
I don't know how much time I have left. I'm lost.
Go one more. Yeah, one more.
Okay, so this is an onboarding question. Given this is a network-wide solution, where do you start from transitioning old tech to new?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So in our world, we'll sit with somebody and go, okay, so let's talk about where we are. The challenge, so I'll just do it from a Redcat perspective. First thing that we'll do with somebody is, in terms of transition, is we set up all the head office systems and get it all up and running so that in a pretend world, like at your head office, you can go, oh, it all works. And you've got all the hardware. So you have kind of a fake shop and you go, yep, when everything happens, I can pretend to sell a hamburger. It goes through the systems. This is great. So you set up a whole environment that's in demo, like not in production, right? You get that to the point where you're really in a happy place. While that's happening, you prep all the shops. You got to look at your shops and say, well, do they have the right infrastructure? So they have the right hardware, and current Windows in our world, mostly Windows operating systems, but it could be Android too, depending what they're using. But do they have current hardware and software ready to go? And do their networks work? And do they have like reasonable communication with the internet and all that sort of core things? Then what we do, once we've got those two things kind of balanced, we actually do a pretty hard and fast hit where we actually go out, we'll do a single shop, run a pilot, get that pilot to the point where everybody's really happy with it, maybe put that into 2 or 3 or 4 shops, and then bang, go out and do all of the shops in a very short amount of time. So the most I think we've done is 160 shops in 8 business days, and that was with physical visits to every shop. So we just go hard and fast and quickly move across once we've checked. Usually it's a 2-month run up to get it ready, and then we smash it out. In our world, the reason we do that, though, you've got to make sure you're doing that for a reason. Our reasoning is because we do loyalty. From a consumer perspective, it's very uncomfortable when your loyalty stops working, or it's on pause, or it's in a bit of a weird place. So we want to minimize the period of time when your loyal customers are inconvenienced almost trying to just doing that switch over. That's probably
Great.
Is that enough, Louis? Have I answered that one? You're the adjudicator now.
Yeah. Yeah, we like it, Lawrence.
There you go.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah, very good. Very good. Very detailed. And yeah, it sounds like it all makes sense, which is great. I have a quick question. So if one of our members wanted to talk to you, like what's step one? What is it that you would do with them?
Oh, so typically what we do when we interact with a new customer, a new potential customer, we'll meet with them and understand what the challenges are, like which just almost always something in that fractured tech stack makes some sense, right? So really we sit down with them and say, so come on, where are your challenges? What's happening? Then we look at what we do and just make sure that it's fit for purpose, that what we do actually suits them or would make sense. And often we'll work with them and compare or talk to some of our other existing customers just to make sure that the use case is correct, right? So because we want to make sure that it is a good fit. Once we've worked through that part and get to the point that commercially everything kind of makes sense and we all understand what we're trying to do, then we go into like a consultation phase where then the technical guys get really involved and go through and check things like what's all the hardware and things, what are all the detailed operational procedures that they use, say in their kitchens or whatever it is, and map it out really, really well. Then we build a system, they get happy with the system, we go to a pilot, and then we roll out. So it's definitely a phased approach, and the beginning bits are quite gentle. They're very consultative, right? Where we're just trying to understand what's going on in that business and how we can help, or making sure we can help, and then roll it forward. So love to talk to anybody who's interested. We're very always very open to at least a coffee and to see at a high level if things look like they would work, and then we work forward from there. So we definitely go gentle and work our way through.
Great. Yep. And when I send you all the recording by Friday, it will have the guys' details on it.
Yeah.
If you want to have a visual look, if any of you have got the Australian Franchise Outlook 2026 mag, you'd only have to open up to the first page. And there's
So
a whole two-page spread on Redcat, and it's a bit more visual of what Lawrence said today. And so thank you very much, Lawrence and Louis. We appreciate that. And I guess what's coming up is our Franchise Industry Awards. So hot off the press, this just went out to everybody's inboxes. And, if you didn't get a copy, let me know. I'll send you a copy straight away. But it's in June 17 this year, next year, sorry. It's in Brisbane. So please come along. Please just nominate. The more nominations we can get, it is free to nominate. Get your brand out there, elevate your brand. And if you're a service provider or even, a franchisor that wants to elevate your brand, there's plenty of sponsorship categories here, award categories that you can sponsor as well. So I just wanted to say that. But all in all, this is the last Lunch and Learn for the year. We've had over yes, thanks, Leah. It was a bit of a cry. And we've had over 600 attendees.
Wow.
To the lunch, actual physical attendees. And so thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Redcat, as well, for being the last cab off the rank, finally.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, see you all in 2026.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you guys.
Bye.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.